Hello, friends. I made it. Doing this was a little bit in flux because of some shit that went down this morning, but I am blown away by how much progress I made in such a short amount of time. So I'll tell you guys a little bit, but yes, for those who this is your first time here, this is the stream I do in the hour leading up to when a new video comes out. And the new video coming out at 2. So it's the weekly tradition. So today, I'm going to give you guys a quick wrap up of all the things that are coming up. So on the 28th, for those who don't know, there's going to be Subscriber Appreciation Day, which is a monthly stream I do. Usually I get a guest. And it's going to have Mexi, which should be super cool. I see already that Shachar and Hellfox Fox and Ace are here. That's good. Good news. Good news. Good news. So I am going to tell you. So 28th Mexi, fun times. It'll be a great show. I hope. Second thing is. I guess that's about it for upcoming things. I haven't figured out marches yet, but I'll work on it. So the other thing I have to mention today is that this stream almost didn't happen because of computer problems. So for those who don't follow me on Twitter, I was having all of these problems with my graphics card for a few months now, and it had to do something with drivers, and it was giving me problems when I was booting up Premiere and Adobe Encoder and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't know how I wound up in this situation, but basically yesterday I was encoding next week's video, and I wound up in a situation where I had no, the encoder just wasn't working anymore, and I wasn't able to make the file. So I went through things, and I did some jiggery-pokery to find out that basically what came down to is there was some serious video card problems, and so I had to completely reboot my computer, which not like just like a typical reboot, but I had to do a system restore. And when that system restore didn't do anything, I then did like a full restore, which meant that I like reinstalled Windows from scratch. And I've spent a good chunk of the day updating and re-downloading all of my programs, and also trying to work on scripts. So I have a whole bunch of stuff. So I have a whole bunch of stuff that I have to do. I had a whole bunch of stuff I had to finish. So that was the thing I was working on. That was my life today. I'm also going to the YouTube space tomorrow to shoot basically all of March's videos, and I am like furiously trying to get all of my scripts finished for tomorrow so that I can go and film, and then I will be doing that. And I also I'm working on that as well. So that's all the stuff that I'm working on right now. But that means that today's been quite crazy. And if there's any lag, which there probably will be because my computer is basically right now maxed out on pretty much everything. It's using like 71% of its CPU and 80% of its memory. So this is a little bit, this might be a bit choppy because I'm encoding a video at the same time as recording this. Anyways, today's video. So today's video is provocatively titled, "Why is there no left-wing party in America?" And it's talking about how most other countries have some sort of left-wing party of some kind. Canada's got the NDP, the British have Labour, but the United States doesn't have one. They have a centrist to center-right party and a hard right-wing party. And that's uncommon in most countries. And so I wanted to see the story about how socialism was a rising force in the 19th century, and when in most countries it became a dominant political party, in America it got pushed out of power, or pushed out. And so that's pretty much the story. That's pretty much what the video is going to be about. And then I think that video is also the second last in my batch of videos that I filmed in January. So I have to film on Friday because in 2 weeks I don't have any more videos. So that's the thing I'm working on. So for this stream, as I usually do, I usually try to take questions from the audience and answer them for you guys. So just let me know what you want to know, and I will just flail pointlessly in the meantime. Because we're getting to some fun stuff. The next batch of videos, the March batch of videos, has a few. The Israeli video is going well. I will say, actually, that the Israeli video had to be pushed back by a week. So now, let me just get the date for you. The Israeli video is coming out on March 29th. And the reason why I pushed it back is because when I was doing the research on what I want to do, I wound up realizing that this video needs to be 2 parts. And so I wasn't going to write both parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write part 1, or I've written part 1, and then I am going to move out. I'm going to try and I have part 2 of the Israel video signed up for the next week after that, which is April 5th. So end of March, beginning of April, there's going to be 2 weeks of Israel videos. Because just when I was doing the research last week, I found that there was far too much to do. Alrighty. Okay, Michael Kirchner. Should Bernie Kratz take over the Dems and turn the words left, or start a new left-wing party? The way that American politics works is that the U.S. has so much anti-democratic policies, and their 2 established political parties are so recalcitrant that it's really going to be hard to have a viable third political party in America. Just with the way that the structure of their elections work, it's very hard to have competitive 3-way races. And because the way that the Electoral College works for president, if you wanted to have a viable third party, you'd actually have to have a third-party leader who is willing to not run for president, which is unlikely. And also, the brands of the Republicans and Democrats are so powerful in America that really starting a third party is hard. Starting a new party is hard anywhere, but in the United States, it's extremely hard. So if the Bernie Kratz want to make a statement, they're either going to have to become a strong force within the Democratic Party and kind of go from there. So that's basically what I would say is, the Democrats are not the best choice, but they are the only choice. Hello, Audible Anarchist. You are only a little bit late. Okay, so what's the next one? What's your shirt? I don't know. I think it's like a surfboard company logo or something. I don't know. It's just a T-shirt I bought because there weren't that many T-shirts that the store I was looking at, so I just bought it. I didn't say anything special to me. All right. Just copying down questions because I might be slow, but I do write down the questions unless I really don't feel like answering them. Did you ever have a childhood bestie? I mean, my best friends when I was young, like when I was like a little kid, I did have a pair of best friends that I hung out with all the time. They were twin brothers, so they're identical twin brothers. So we usually did everything as a trio, probably until I was about, I don't know, probably high school. Was the Red Scare ever as significant anywhere outside the United States as inside? Not really, I don't think. The Red Scare kind of reached ridiculous levels in the United States. Now, I guess you could call like the fascist takeovers of states being a kind of exaggerated Red Scare, which you could totally do. I think that would be pretty fun, but at the moment, that seems out of reach. Could you do a video on the Swedish pre-industrial parliamentary party tomfoolery with the hats and caps? I feel like that would be a better Art Explains video than a Step Back History video. Spillbass, did I hear Israel videos? Yes, March 22nd. No, sorry, March 29th and April 5th, part 1 and 2 of a video on the history of specifically the Arab-Israeli conflict. So it's going to be about, the first part 1 is about Zionism and the push to create a Jewish state in Palestine, all the way up until part 1 ends when Israel declares its independence in 1948. And then part 2 is going to be about Israel, the country. A holy war in my honor would probably go against everything that I believe in. So please, no holy wars. All right. What do you think about the stigma against combining current politics and teaching history? I have heard professors reference a sort of unspoken 20-year rule. Oh, like the line between when something is old enough to be considered history. I actually challenge the notion. My dissertation is actually very much on this subject. My dissertation is pretty much my dissertation is very much on like what is the line between memory and history, and that is a difficult line to tread because I think that it's not so much a factor of age as it is a factor of the way we contextualize things. So I actually don't think that the 20-year rule, I guess, could be an easy like go-to, but in reality, it's more of we can kind of see something as history if you can kind of see the impacts of the thing that's happened, and it's enough that the event feels firmly in the past. And so what I'm arguing is that there are some events, like 9/11, for example, and World War II to a different extent, where there's been some things related to them that are traumatic in a cultural way, and that trauma means that even if something gets older, even older than the 20-year rule, I would argue, they don't fully exit the realm of memory, and so that so they have trouble becoming historical events. And I'm studying 9/11 as an example of that, of an event that is now going to be 17 years old this year, and yet still doesn't feel like a historical event. Views on the USA religious right. There's a really good book on the religious right that is escaping me right now, but it is a book that shows that a few things. One, that the American religious right was created. For the most part, there was a time when American political, like the religious right, felt that they didn't have the ability to, or that they shouldn't get involved in politics, and that there was an active movement to put religion into politics. It started in the late 60s and pretty much started over like issues to do with abortion and evolution, but it's kind of then turned into its own movement of own lobby or part of things, if you will. Yeah, if Tristan went on Chapo, I'd be so happy. Yeah, I want to put that on my my bucket list of things I want to do as an internet celebrity is to go on Chapo. Unfortunately, I don't know what I'd talk about on Chapo. They're so much cleverer and funnier than me, and I feel like Matt Christman would probably even be better at history than I am. So I don't know what we'd talk about, but I would love it. I love Chapo. Alrighty. The Canadian political pendulum always ends up following the American political pendulum. I mean, to an extent, Canada does have a large obsession with following American politics to kind of a pathological degree. And so sometimes we're not allowed to have our own politics in a big way, and it might be the reason why our left-wing party, the NDP, has always been in like third place. But we have our own political issues that drag out other things. So I would say that there's like some people who say that Canada's political pendulum follows the American one by like 10 years or something. So like Stephen Harper was our George Bush, and Trudeau is like our Obama, and I guess that means that we're lined up to get some sort of like reactionary fascist or something like that. So yeah, that's not I'm not too happy about that, but I think that that's not likely to happen. I think that Canada's, I don't know, the next election will be really interesting because the Conservatives and the NDP both have new leaders, and they're both very young. One's doing a better job at advertising himself, but I have no idea how it's going to turn out with Andrew Scheer, who's like representing the American conservative or the Canadian Conservatives moving back towards a more socially conservative base, and Jagmeet Singh, who's the new leader of the NDP, who comes from provincial politics, and he's not an MP, and so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how Jagmeet Singh does as prime minister, if he ever got it. But yeah, I don't think anybody knows how the 2019 election is going to turn out because there's a lot going on. Justin Trudeau is not exactly all that popular anymore, so it'd be interesting to see how that turns out. What's your opinion on the lectures by Michael Parenti? I haven't seen them. Jeremy Corbyn or Theresa May? I hope that's a joke because obviously Jeremy Corbyn. How did you become a leftist? One of the things that I think I remembered is a couple things. We had a very left-wing civics teacher when I was in high school who, when we learned about Canadian politics, he was very much like a social justice type, like left, like NDP-er guy. And that got me on a good start. But on top of that, I remember in history class when we were talking about the First World War and when we were talking about the end of the First World War specifically and the Russian Revolution. And the teacher made some statement about like trying to describe what communism was. And she was trying to say that like communism is this ideology that everyone should be treated equally, and that we shouldn't have like pay people more for different types of work, and that nobody should be poor and no one should be rich. Isn't that terrible? And I was like, this sounds awesome. Where do I sign up? And kind of that, followed by the civics class, followed by like years of just reading books and stuff like that, has pretty much turned me into a leftist. My parents are also leftish wing. I mean, not really. They're kind of, I would probably say that my dad is left wing and my mom's right wing, but they, raised me with a sense of justice, right and wrong, be fair to other people, that kind of stuff, which I think was pretty, at least fertile ground. And then, of course, the fact it's easy to become a leftist when you're a millennial, and you came into adulthood during, the biggest, like the most economically unstable time since the Great Depression, and at the same time that you saw inequality growing to its greatest heights in history since the Gilded Age and things like that. So that a lot of millennials are leftists, because history is something inherently related to inherited PTSD. I'm not sure if I'd go as far as say inherited PTSD, but there's something about an event that is in living memory, especially when it's in living memory for a majority of people, where it doesn't quite feel like the past if it's a particularly traumatic event. Like, for example, like 9/11 is the example that I'm going with, which is that there are a lot of people, most people, still remember it happening. And it's moving out of living memory, but for the people who experienced it, there's so many of these flashbulb memories, these very vivid traumatic memories, that 9/11 is not really ever going to feel like history to those people. I don't know if there's ever going to be a moment for me, for example, when I think that I don't think there's ever going to be a situation in which I think that 9/11 feels like history to me. We'll feel like we've moved past it. And that sounds like trauma to me. And so I'm trying to figure out what that is. But then who knows if we find ourselves out of the war on terror. So I think that maybe in the past we could just say if we feel like we've moved on from the moment that event is associated with, then maybe we can consider it history. What's your view of conservatism? Rich and racist, or just cold and illogical? Cold and logical is definitely not the way that conservatives think. Conservatism, this is going to get me in so much trouble. I think conservatism is a personality flaw. It is, being a conservative is having a mindset where you look at the world as it was either today or the way that it used to be, with all of its grotesque inequalities and injustices, and saying, no, this is the thing that we need to strive for. And it shows this sort of reactionary mindset. There's a really good book called, I think it's called The Reactionary Mind, or something in that vein. And what it describes is that conservatism throughout the years has always been a reaction against justice, or against the forces of equality, to try and maintain the hierarchies in a society at any given time. So, conservatives during monarchies were the ones who tried to defend the monarchy because they didn't want the power structure to change, usually because they were benefiting from it. And today, when we're trying to break down the structural inequalities of race and gender and culture, the conservatives are the people who are trying to maintain those hierarchies of race and gender and culture. So they're trying to, if we're going to try to break down gender because gender creates inherently unequal relationships, they're going to double down and say that, history is, or say that there are only two genders or something like that. Or, they'll react against people who are trying to fight for racial justice because, I never really got an explanation as to how that works, but whatever. So that's where that would go, I would probably say. I do think that one thing about making somebody conservative too is that there is a strong empathy gap. A lot of conservatives have a lot of trouble experiencing compassion for other people. And I bet Art Explain, since he's here, could probably say in the chat a lot better than I could, but there's also a link psychologically between conservatism and an easy sense of disgust, which is in the conservatives that I have to interact with in my life, that seems to come up, is that there's like this sense of they feel disgust more often than the average person, and somehow that makes them more prone to becoming conservatives. Alrighty. So Health Fox asks again, who do you like better, Jeremy Corbyn or Theresa May? And I would say nobody likes Theresa May. I don't know anybody who likes her. I imagine there are a few British people who tolerate her, but as far as I know, nobody's super happy with her. And Jeremy Corbyn sounds awesome. I am like totally a bigger fan of Jeremy Corbyn and the stuff that he puts out. If Jeremy Corbyn were prime minister, I think Britain would probably be in a much better place. Opinion on school shooting. They're super shitty, and they're the reason why America really needs to deal with the gun culture around it. Now, I'm not sure what America could do about gun control, especially in the situation it's in now. If you put in a gun registry, you'd have so many nut jobs who would refuse to comply. And if you tried to do something like banning AR-15s, that would be a pretty difficult thing to accomplish, especially because there are nut jobs who have been driven crazy by the NRA and they will not comply with the law. So I'm not sure how to solve it, except to like try to make some sort of change. I guess like you have to change the culture in which, you've seen how nasty the backlash has been against changing culture when it comes to like, let's not be racist, led to like huge backlashes. And like, let's not arm ourselves to the teeth all the time. Might be a difficult thing to do. I made a video about the Second Amendment where I kind of said in the video, why is it that, and this is super sacrilegious for Americans, why is it that something that's in the Constitution, like all of a sudden makes it holy writ? Like, why is it that the Constitution is like this inflexible thing that is unable to be scrutinized for its utility in a modern audience or for a modern country? And for some reason, in America, that's just not questionable, and I don't know why. What about a traumatic event like slavery, which is not actually in popular memory? I'm not like there's like people who believe that memory is a thing that can be inherited, and things like the trauma of like slavery and the Holocaust can have like a genetic impact on the people who come afterwards. And I'm not super sure how much I believe of that, because it makes more physical claims than I think is comfortable about how memory works, especially because if there's one thing I've learned about how the brain works, is that nobody knows how it works really all that well yet. But I will say that there is trauma within culture that gets passed down culturally. One good example would be to read the graphic novel series Mouse, which is about a cartoonist named Art Spiegelman and his father, who is a Holocaust survivor, and the kind of experience of what there's the kind of like trauma that comes from growing up with somebody who's gone through that kind of trauma, and then that gets passed down to a further generation. And you could say that there are cultural remnants of trauma that come out, especially like, for example, in African American communities in the U.S., there's a large amount, fairly large amount of skepticism and paranoia, especially of authority figures, and that will make things difficult. But it comes from the cult, like generations upon generations of not being able to trust white people, and white people then being the authority and not being able to trust authority. So it's perfectly understandable, but it's a thing that is that's passed down. And I'm not cued in enough about Jewish studies to say what would be the impact on Jewish communities. Despite what many commenters would say, I'm not Jewish. Well, I'm like something like 1.8% Jewish or something like that, but nobody I've ever known is Jewish, or nobody I've known in my family is Jewish. So I guess we could talk about what the term collective memory really means. So collective memory and memory, memory is now it's a growing field in this interdisciplinary field that's just called memory studies, which is the space I'm working in. And it's trying to figure out how people remember, but also how societies remember. And humans, like individually, we remember, we just store things in our memories. Though memory has been shown to be a much more fluid thing than we think it is. It's not like a computer. Memory for a human in a human brain is something that needs to be reinforced regularly, or else it will decay. It's something that is more attached to like monikers and symbols. And so we have like symbols that attach memories of things to them. This is why things like people say that like scents and contexts and scenery can have that sort of impact on you. And so yeah, there's like a whole bunch of there is that, and that means that it is it's malleable, it's changeable, and it can be, and forgetting is a thing that can happen for various reasons. I once read an article that was called "The 7 Different Ways We Forget," which is quite interesting, actually. Collective memory, how we pass on information from one generation to the next. So it's all the things that we do. It's our social interaction, which means it's culture, which means it's like what narratives we tell to generations after us. It's what we deem as important. So it's what we build memorials to. It's what we build museums about. It's what we write books about. Cultural products, things that we pass down as part of our quote unquote collective memory. And by doing so, there's a sort of fight, a sort of a process of re-examination and integration that is similar to how we remember things in our mind, because it's based on symbols, it's based on narratives, things that are very strong in how we form our own what is called autobiographical memory also applies for things like our past events. Stories of and these stories can be very powerful. I would probably say that the idea of creating a collective identity around a country, which involves fighting and creating a narrative around yourself and creating claims and things like that, is how nations are made. Nations are just a powerful story that is passed down culturally and accepted by enough people that they get the right to exist. It's all it is. There's nothing biological to it. It's a cultural construct. Nationality is a social construct. What a surprise. And that also means that for things that are traumatic to a culture, like 9/11, we can call it I would call it traumatic because there's problems that we're having with integrating it into our past. We still don't have a satisfying way to teach 9/11 in history class. I know, because I have taught the 9/11 history lecture several years in a row. And now that we're in the age where people in undergrad actually don't have autobiographical memories of 9/11, all of their information about 9/11 is cultural. I would even argue that to an extent, even my memory of 9/11 is cultural because I wasn't there. That's like the next level of my dissertation, is that like not only is like the memory of 9/11 something that we're competing over what it's going to mean and what it's going to be about for future generations, but at the same time, even the way that we experienced, people who were alive during 9/11 and remember it, also have their memory shaped by the ways that we absorb memory. So my memory of 9/11 was shaped by CNN because I watched CNN when 9/11 stuff was happening. So whatever CNN, a for-profit corporation, was deemed important or deemed that needed to get attention, shaped the way that I remember 9/11. And the government, through the war on terror, tried to craft the 9/11 narrative into a war. And these are the kinds of fights that we do. And like, so to me, history is something that we have been able to tell a story about. And until we can tell a story about it, until like we can like use it as an event in a larger story, I feel like we don't get to call something history. And that's when things get complicated. Because 9/11 was like 17 years ago almost. And if 9/11 was 17 years ago, then there's no but yet yet we can't find a way to tell the war on terror story narrative as if it has an ending. Then it's kind of stuck. And when people are experiencing post-traumatic stress, this is the problem. This is what people who have PTSD are suffering through. They're unable to contextualize the event that happened to them in their past. They're unable to put it into their autobiographical story. So they keep revisiting it and they keep coming back to it over and over again. And that is the traumatic stress. And so there's a parallel, there's a metaphor there anyway, about how do we do 9/11? How do we make 9/11 a part of our contextual past? And in some ways, trying to of a traumatic event like 9/11 is our way of trying to get over it and try to move past it, which is very much like how PTSD people who have PTSD go through therapy. Part of going through therapy for PTSD involves trying to integrate the event, not trying to run away from the event or forget about it, but try to integrate it into your own narrative, which means like, trying to find some sort of meaning in it. That is the way that people with PTSD tend to go through therapy for it. And so I consider, so in history, I feel is a similar type of process, especially for the traumatic events in our past. Sorry, I went on like a big rant there because that was like that's basically my I basically just did my dissertation nutshell for you guys. All right. By the way, Ace, I don't know of any good Canadian sitcoms. Our TV shows are notoriously bad because even bad TV shows get funding and they get mandatory airtime because of the Canadian content laws. Whew, man. Oh man, I talked for almost 10 minutes about that whole thing. Have you heard of incels? I unfortunately have Cletus 223. Incels were a Reddit community of people who, because nobody would want to date them, they sort of, because of like it stands for involuntary celibacy. And it was sort of this community that turned the like impotent rage of not being able to hook up with women and reconfigured it into this like burning misogyny, and it was extremely toxic. And eventually got shut down because somebody was like getting advice from the community saying that they should like hunt down women and like harass them, and like I think like there was like you should commit like a violent act against them, and I was like, holy shit, okay. So Canadians have bad TV shows. We have good comedians, and Canadian comedians tend to do really well and then go to the United States. So a lot of famous comedians are Canadian, but Canada doesn't really support its arts, at least its good arts, all that much. I don't know what black identity extremism laws are being proposed in the United States, Ronnie Gabriel. I've never heard of. I don't even know what you're talking about. If you could elaborate, please, because I've never heard of these things. Oh, I guess I could go on another rant about memory and nationalism and things like that. So, for example, I did a video a couple weeks ago about the Black Panthers and how creating culture, creating a narrative around a group is typically considered nation building, but it's also a way of trying to fight for space in the narrative of our past and gain legitimacy as a nation, as a group of people. And so black nationalism was very much a movement to try and create a black identity, which was beyond just they were brought over involuntarily as slaves and then got freedom and now they're just here. So it was an attempt to try and tell a story from their African roots up to today and talk about and encourage art and encourage an identity for themselves and like build that identity so that you could have something that you could stick to and be proud of. Ace asks, does Canada have nationalists in your parliament? I'm sure we have some. The thing about Canada, though, is that we're not really, I would probably say that we're a country, but I wouldn't say we're a nation. Canada has nations inside of it, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And so many people in the country are first generation or less immigrants. So Canada, like something like more than half of the country are first generation or less immigrants, and that's just true. And Canada does have some laws that are like Canada has laws that are like in place to protect some national groups, Indigenous groups. The French Canadians come up a lot, but anytime you try to ramp up Canadian nationalism, it just doesn't work too well. It just doesn't. When you try to like there was an attempt to have a Canadian nationalist leader of the Conservative Party. Her name was Kelly Leitch, and her campaign failed miserably because even the Canadian Conservatives didn't really care for what they were doing. All right. Is there any good Canadian music? I think is what Shachar's asking. I don't. I wouldn't be able to tell you. We have a handful of Canadian artists that they get famous one way or another. I mean, Canada's got a great music scene. A lot of popular musicians that come out of the United States started in Canada. It's another thing. It's like comedians, where you'll be surprised that there are so many famous bands from like, that you just assume are Americans are actually Canadians. Like, let's just say a few off the top of my head. Justin Bieber is Canadian. Alanis Morissette is Canadian. What the hell's her? What's the person's name? There's another young girl or another lady. She did the Skater Boy song. But she was really popular in the 2000s. She's Canadian. The Guess Who, Sum 41, the Bare Naked Ladies. So there's like. So like, yeah, Tragically Hip. There's Simple Plan, Arcade Fire. Yeah, there's like tons of Canadian artists that get internationally famous because they do well in Canada, then someone in the US picks them up, and then they come over and they do well. Avril Lavigne. Avril Lavigne is the person I was thinking of, yes. And yes, Gavin McGinnis is from Canada as well. So yeah, Canada does really well. I would probably argue that Canada punches well above its weight when it comes to culture like that because of it. Yeah, Nickelback too. Avril Lavigne is married to the singer from Nickelback, isn't she? So it's, Canada punches way above its weight because there's a combination of us being very culturally similar to the United States, very culturally entwined with the United States. The Arrogant Worms. Oh God, the Arrogant Worms doesn't count as a famous band. Come on. So like, yeah, the Arrogant Worms are like a joke band from Alberta, and I remember because when I moved to Quebec, every single person would want to play that song because they wanted to tell me how much Ontario sucks. Trust me, that's all they ever want to do. That's how I know about the Arrogant Worms. Oh, gosh. What's your opinion on Myanmar? Well, that's a much less interesting topic, or I shouldn't say. It's an interesting topic. It's not a very happy topic. So right now, Myanmar is a country that I should say is in a tough situation. Not tough situation. It's committing genocide. And unfortunately, because we have decided as a society that we're going to just hate Muslim people, that because the Rohingya people, the people who live in Myanmar who are being genocided right now, because they're Muslims, they're not really getting the attention that they need because this is a humanitarian crisis that nobody's paying attention to, because it's Buddhists killing Muslims. Is Britain the only English-speaking nation who says mum instead of mom? No. Australians do, and South Africans do, and I think Kiwis do too. Yeah, so the Oregon worms are, I don't know, they're not super, they're not super cogent to me. Oh man! All right, we got 10 minutes. What do you guys want to talk about for the next 10 minutes? Alrighty, let me just check the chat. Okay. Thanks for the awesome rant/percentage dissertation. What do you, if you are teaching an uncomfortable historical truth that goes against popular memory, like Native American slavery? What do you do if you're teaching an I mean, I think that most history teachers don't shy away from those things. They are part of the past. They are a thing that you contextualize. Just talk about it. This is a thing that happened. It's Native American slavery is interesting to talk about because it had a structure that was very different from, say, chattel slavery. And or there's like groups like the Cherokee in the early America actually did practice slavery to show just how white they could be, which says something. So difficult subjects are hard, though. I simple statement of the year, huh? But I taught a tutorial where I had to talk about birth control and specifically how abortion worked before abortion was legal, and all of the kind of clandestine, secret ways that women had like been passing down to each other over the years, and it was tough. Those aren't the easiest courses to teach, and so it's how it goes. What do I do if I'm arrested for drug possession or something in the future? I don't know. Come on. All right, Shachar. I didn't want to talk about Israel in a stream because Israel is a big topic that has a lot of nuance and a lot of context that you have to sift through, and it was just too much for like a one-off statement. Oh boy. But yeah, there's another one. Like the Armenian genocide is another example of two groups that are fundamentally fighting over a historical event for the purposes of trying to win the narrative. The Armenian genocide is something that hasn't had the last page written on it yet, and so for a lot of ways, it's very damaging to both Armenians and Turks, and there's no, especially Armenians, by the way, and so that's why there's such a debate. Like Turkey would have to admit that it committed genocide, which comes with all sorts of baggage. Just like how here we don't want to admit that we committed genocide, but we do. We did. How can you tweet during the stream? Did I tweet during the stream? I have some apps that I use Recurpost to repost stuff every once in a while. So fairly often it's because of that. It's something automatic. It's like Alrighty, I'm just getting near the end, so I'm just going quickly to my channel to grab my my video. Go to the creator studio. Oh, the Twitter thing is called Recur Post. RECURPOST. What do you think of my neck? I'm not sure. Oh yeah, my Twitter is totally at TristanPEJ. Okay. Next stream, you're going to be a legal adult. You're going to be turning 18. Congratulations, Doughboy DeVito. You just made me feel old as shit. But also, happy birthday. That'll be really fun. Your 18th birthday is always a good one, especially if you live in, I don't remember where Doughboy DeVito lives. You either live in the UK or in the, what's it called? United States. Oh, boy. Pasco, Washington. Oh, you live in America. All right. Then I'm very sorry that turning 18 isn't as fun as it is in other countries. I remembered the drinking age here in Canada, or at least in Ontario, is 19. I remembered visiting the United States for like 3 years where I could drink in Canada, but I couldn't drink in America, and it sucked. Oh my. In this June, you're going to have your bar mitzvah. You are such a youngin'. I'm so old. I'm going to have my, what's it called? I'm going to do my birthday stream this year, and it's going to be the worst one ever because I'm turning 30. I'm turning 30 in November, and it's just going to be blah. Who is to blame for World War I? Germany or Serbia? Nationalism. Nationalism is to blame for World War I. I don't think the Serbs deserved what they went through. I don't think anyone deserves war. War is terrible. War is freaking terrible. And the fact that anybody can talk about it as if it's like this cool, awesome, wonderful thing and not like just be in horror of all of the terrible, terrible impact it has on people's lives and livelihoods and how much death it causes. Like, I don't know. I can't see war as like the like tactics and strategies and things like that, because all I see is it's mayhem, it's death, it's destruction. And I don't want that. I don't want to wish that on anybody. I don't want any family to lose their kids. I don't want any families to lose their parents. I don't want orphans. I don't want famine and starvation. I don't want I don't know. I don't understand. I guess like I can't get into military history the same way as other people because that's just the way I see things. I don't know. I don't think there was. I think that Anya, I will probably say that World War I was a systemic problem. It was the way the world worked at that time. The fact that it was really once you start a war in like the days of like railroad timelines and things like that. We'll have to talk about it next week because it's 2:00. So, anyways, you guys have a really great week. If you can remember for the next stream, bring up that World War I question because I'd love to talk more about why World War I was a structural problem that the rest of the world that really the country didn't deal with. So anyways, cheers.